Well, welcome to the Speak with People podcast. My name is Jason Raitz, and I'm so excited that you are joining us today. At Speak with People, we believe that healthy communication is oxygen for our relationships and our leadership. And so whether you communicate one-on-one, to a team, from a stage, or from behind a screen, like I'm doing now, we hope that our time today encourages you, inspires you, challenges you to communicate in healthy ways. We know that when the leader communicates in healthy ways, you can drastically change your world. Well, I am so excited about today's podcast because we have a special guest with us, an amazing author. I'll tell you more about him in a second, but we're diving into the secret power of kindness, especially in our communication. And in some leadership circles, kindness is viewed as weakness. Many leaders believe being kind won't get you ahead. Being kind with our words won't help you increase your leadership or close the next deal. We know that's not especially true. We know that's not true at all, especially if you're striving to be a healthy communicator as a leader. And in order to be effective, in order to be a healthy communicator, we've got to be kind. Kindness must permeate throughout our communication. Well, today's interview, we interview Greg Atkinson, and I am just so blessed to have him on the podcast. He is an author, a thought leader. I first heard about him years ago because he is just a systems and hospitality guru, and I just downloaded and watched everything that I possibly could. And he's the mastermind behind the First Impressions conference that just reaches tens of thousands of leaders. And I'm so excited to have him with us because his new book, The Secret Power of Kindness, just released. And I actually just got it in the mail 2 days ago and read through the entire thing. So Greg, I want to just welcome you with a big, giant welcome to the Speak with People podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Honored to be here.
Absolutely. Well, hey, before we go into some of our conversation about kindness and the secret power of kindness, especially in our communication, could you just give our listeners a little bit more about you and your story and what you do and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, well, I am in my 30th year of ministry and leadership. Started on staff at my first church in the early 90s. So it's been 30 years and 23 years of speaking. I know you work with a lot of speakers and communicators. So I started speaking nationally at conferences in 2000 and I've spoke at hundreds of events. And in 2003, I started speaking for 8 years at the Moody Bible Pastors Conference with thousands of pastors from all over the world. And my topic that they gave me every year was creative communication. And I taught pastors how to be better communicators and how to be creative in their communication. So I've been enjoying life as a speaker. And then over the last decade as a writer and author, I've always felt like I had a book in me, but I didn't write my first book until 2010. So it's been 13 years of writing, and this book on kindness is my 5th book. And I'm just overwhelmed and amazed by the support that it's getting, and so happy to discuss it here with you. But I am a husband, a father of 3 adult kids, 2 in college, 1 in grad school. I'm based in the Charlotte metro, and I still consult with churches, still run conferences, and starting to do coaching for entrepreneurs and business leaders. So that's what keeps me busy these days.
I love it. Well, it's an honor to have you. I know when we started Speak with People, I shot you an email and you were so gracious and kind to take some time with me. And even the notes from that first conversation, helped me just tremendously. And so I appreciate your kindness that you gave to me. Well, I gotta tell you, I got this in the mail, just even 2 days ago. I ordered it right away on Amazon, and I was really pleased because I got an email the next day from Amazon that pushed the delivery date. So I knew that was because, it was selling out. And so I was just blown away by your transparency, your vulnerability. Especially the first chapter on forgiveness. You just took us to such a depth. And I think maybe for some of our listeners, they could relate to me. Sometimes when we think about the secret power of kindness and being kind and exhibiting kindness, we don't always think about forgiveness. And so I just appreciate you, taking us there. What why did you start with forgiveness? Take us kind of into that journey a little bit.
A couple reasons. Great question. Two things that came into play was one, my previous books were on leadership, and those are practical how-to books, and I didn't have to share my story at all. And so to write my first book to the broad, wide, general audience that anybody could pick it up and read it, I wanted the reader to know who I am and what I've been through. And then in a small group at my church, we were talking about forgiveness, and the word kindness came up, and I saw how they interrelated. And I got to thinking about how if I had not forgiven those who have hurt me, those who have wronged me, and I was still walking around with unforgiveness in my heart, and I was bitter and angry, I would not be a very kind person. And so for a lot of people, even though they have a good intention and a desire to be kind, if they have not dealt with unforgiveness, and if they have this anger always underneath the surface, they're going to snap at people and be short and be grumpy and be mad, and they won't be known as kind people. So I wanted to start right out with this huge concept and principle of forgiveness, and also let the reader hear my own personal journey.
Well, I mean, it was a tremendous decision, I think, on your part, because I know even in my own life, you tapped into such a powerful story, and I was immediately taken to some places in my life where it was like, a slap against my head, like, okay, forgiveness would really lead to kindness in this area. And so, I mean, just as a reader, it impacted me greatly. Why do you think, at times, especially in leadership circles, some view kindness as a weakness? Can you share some thoughts, insights on how, crucial kindness is, especially in leadership circles?
Yeah, I think in business and leadership, any kind of organization where you're a leader, if you are known as a kind leader, a kind boss, and kind employer, your employees are going to want to go the extra mile for you. They're going to want to run through a wall for you. They're going to want to bend over backwards to achieve goals and to see the team win. And so there's so many leaders over the years that have modeled kindness, but we have the ultimate example in Jesus and the way he modeled servant leadership. And there's been tons of books written over the years on servant leadership. A best-selling book that's still just flying off the shelf is Ken Blanchard's Lead Like Jesus. And what we know from Jesus is that he was not weak. He was very strong, but he led with kindness and was known for kindness. He was kind to the woman caught in adultery. He was kind to the woman at the well. He was kind to Nicodemus. He's kind all throughout his earthly ministry and the Gospels that we read about. But we also know from what he went through on the cross, how strong he was, and the beatings he endured and all that he was a strong man and able to take on a lot as a human being and as a person, also as fully God. And so Jesus would be the ultimate model. And I do love books like Lead Like Jesus. I was mentored a decade ago by a guy that helped Ken Blanchard write Lead Like Jesus. And so we would meet once a week, and he would mentor me on leading like Jesus. And there are a lot of people that I have encountered over the years, whether it be John Maxwell or Bob Goff, but people that are known for joy and kindness, and nobody thinks of them as weak. They actually aspire to be like them and to be known for the kind of kindness and joy that they exude, and then what it's like to be around them. And, somebody in popular culture that had a very popular television show that was loved by millions was Mr. Rogers. And Mr. Rogers left a lasting legacy and led with a lot of strength and broke a lot of barriers and broke ground back in some early days with prejudice and racism and things that he did on his show that we should love our neighbor and love everybody. And so he was very bold and very strong and very strategic as a leader to put forward what he wanted the viewers to see modeled and displayed. And then it had an impact on us as kids, because all of us have Mr. Rogers stories, and we're marked by somebody kind on television. And it's the same way as now as a husband and father, that I'm trying to leave a mark on my family
Yep.
as a kind leader, a kind husband, a kind father. And I was blessed that I had some amazing endorsements, but my favorites and my publisher's favorites are by my kids. The very first page of the book, my 3 adult kids endorsed me and endorsed the book. And so
That.
leading with kindness goes a long way.
I love that. I love that, especially, you know, I have older kids as well, and I can remember having, young kids and all the older people telling me, don't blink, it's going to go, it's going to go by so fast. And, here we are now. And I think about, all the funerals I've officiated, or, funerals I've led, and how many times kids don't want to speak, when they've lost a parent, because of how broken or awful the relationship is. And so, especially as parents, if we can, be able to speak kindness into our kids, and then it comes back as they're adults. I mean, I love that. I love that example. When people lead, depending on if you're a small business owner or a ministry leader, I mean, there are times when leaders have to be, assertive. They have to be direct with their words. Sometimes people think, oh, I can't be kind and still be assertive. What do you think about, that tension, that balance, of still being kind with your communication, but still being, assertive and direct? How would you help us walk through that tension?
Yeah, I think tension is a great word. I think it is walking a fine line, and I do that as a leader. We just had the Spring First Impressions Conference, and the whole theme was kindness. And one of the leaders did a talk on communication, and she said, being clear is being kind. And so I had something go on with my team and one of my team members, and something that wasn't done properly. And I referred to that talk. I said, hey, I was just watching this person's talk, and they said, being clear is kind. So I'm going to be very clear with you and tell you what was messed up and what I don't like and what I need to be fixed. And so anybody that's spent time with me on a team or a staff or in business matters knows I can be very clear, very direct, very blunt, but it's always done in kindness. It's just that I don't think we do anybody any favors by beating around the bush and hemming and hawing. So if I can be clear and say, this is where we fell short, this is where we need to go, what can we do to turn it around and to get there? That's being clear to a team member of, hey, we missed the mark, but we can step it up and make changes and correct it in enough time. So my advice would be clear is kind.
That's so incredibly powerful. I think back to my young leadership days, and I think I was actually unkind because I did beat around the bush. And I can remember one moment when, one of my staff members, found out from someone else what I really thought. And, it was like, oh no, I cannot believe that I, did that. Are there any, practical examples that you think of, especially in team leadership or, working with a team where, we can integrate kindness in those everyday relationships, in the everyday work environments? What are some things that we can do to just make sure we're bringing kindness into those areas?
Yeah, well, I like how you said every day. So I would start a day at a time. You can't change the past. You can't change the history of how you may have led up into this point. But going forward, you can wake up every day, give it to God, commit to work for God's glory, and to take a different approach with your team, with your employer, with your employees, with your staff members. You can choose to operate differently and intentionally to be kind. And so a couple of things that I have studied and practiced. I spent years working with a therapist on the skill of active listening. And I wrote a blog post on my blog, gregatkinson.com, about active listening. And I think pastors.com picked it up. But I wrote about being an active listener and pastors needing to be active listeners. And part of that in everyday leadership is just being curious, caring more about the other person and what they have to say than my reply back to them. What's unfortunate in the majority of interactions is we are so busy thinking about our reply when somebody else is speaking that we don't truly hear them. And so if we have a posture of curiosity and
Yep.
say, tell me your story, tell me your side, tell me your perspective, I really want to know. What has happened is I have practiced active listening so much over the last few years after training under my therapist that there are times when somebody finishes talking and I will pause, and this happens all the time, and says, I don't know what I was going to say. I was listening to you so hard. Let me think for a second because I've lost my reply because I was so intent on listening. But it's very easy to fall back into an old habit or where I used to just want to cut somebody off or interrupt or get my point in. And I was so worried about my reply. And so when I saw that that was an issue and that I had a team member say, you interrupt a lot, you're cutting me off and you're trying to get your voice in, your defense in, let me finish, then I wanted to take that upon myself as an adult and say, I'm going to work on this. It's the same way when I was in my early 20s in leadership. I had an elder at the church come to me and say, Greg, you're super talented, very gifted. But one thing that I think that you could work on is EQ, emotional intelligence. He said, you're very intelligent, but he said, I'm going to give you a book on emotional intelligence. And this was the very first emotional intelligence book. Now there's a lot of EQ books and emotional intelligence books, but this was, 20 years ago when the very first one came out, or 25 years ago. And I read that and started thinking about what can I do to be a more emotionally intelligent leader in my meetings and my interactions. And there's some team members that can just take the wind out of a room with an attitude, with a face, with a comment in a staff meeting. The whole thing just tanks and it ruins everybody's mood in the meeting. And so when you study emotional intelligence and how to be self-aware and how to realize how you're coming across, how you present yourself, what your face is expressing and things like that, then you can be a better team member and your team will thank you. And, that's something, also under the topic of clear as kind and what we can do as leaders. I learned a long time ago from a mentor, and I've shared this with people. Nobody should walk into evaluation, a performance evaluation or review at the end of the year and be surprised by anything that is said. We're getting blindsided one time by a supervisor, by a boss who hit me with notes from February that he had been journaling and waiting until December, end of the year, to hit me with in a performance review. And I said, you could have told me this all year long and I could have been working on it. And so nobody should be blindsided at an end of the year review. You should have regular check-ins. I used to do once a week one-on-ones with my team members. And so when you're doing one-on-one meetings with your team members, you still have goals, you still have things you want to fix, to improve, to get better. And then you are constantly saying, how are we doing on this area? So that when December comes and you do an end of the year review, you say, as you know, we have been discussing since February or April blank, and it looks like you still have not improved. And then some things could come about of things of whether or not that person gets in trouble or loses their job or whatever may happen. But it should never be blindsided. It should never be a surprise. It should be, we have been talking about this all year long, and you've come a long way, or we've talked about this all year long and you haven't made any improvement. We're going to have to do A, B, or C, but never blindside somebody in the end of the year review.
Yep, absolutely. So many things there. I mean, I'm taking furious notes. Let me back up for a second. I can remember I'm an MBA dropout. So years ago, I was working at a very large church in the Chicago area, started an MBA. And my third class, they had me read Primal Leadership by Daniel Goleman. And same like you, just my emotional intelligence world just kind of exploded. And I started learning about so many of those bad habits. And so you listed out some of those bad habits. but I thought maybe we could park there for a second, because some of those, bad emotional intelligence habits, they can really take over. And so we talked about a couple. Didn't know if there's any others that kind of come to mind, or some areas to kind of stay away from, to make sure
Yeah,
that you.
I think when I think back over team members that I've had issues with and either uh, considered firing, had to fire, or encouraged them to go find another job, those situations, um, they were not motivated, they were not inspired, they were apathetic. They did not enjoy coming to work each day. They did not give their best. They were mailing it in. And so when you have somebody that has a good heart and is a good character, you can do a lot with that, even if they're not as talented, even if they're not as
Yep.
gifted. But you can be as gifted and talented as anybody. But if you don't have good character, that's just not going to last, and your character won't sustain you. And so when somebody is mailing it in, comes in with a bad attitude, I don't care how good of a communicator they are, if they're a student pastor or a children's minister, doesn't matter if they're amazing on Sunday morning and can preach the paint off the walls. If they come in Monday through Friday and they're in a bad attitude and they're mailing it in and they don't take their job seriously, they don't take the supervisor relationship seriously, and they don't. We used to do weekly reports with my team members where I would hear from them and what they're working on, and I would have a guy that didn't fill it out, didn't put down what he was working on, didn't want to go through the motions of informing me and communicating with me, because I've always been big on communication.
Yep.
And keeping lines of communication open.
Yep.
So when I was an employee, what I used to do with my boss without him asking was give him an end of the week and a monthly report saying, here's all I've been up to. Because my boss at a very large church in Dallas, my boss, who I love so much, gave me so much freedom and so much room to run that he did not micromanage me in any way, but I wanted him to know what all I had been up to and what all I was doing.
Yep.
So I would email him and say, just so you know, I did this. And it actually just happened recently with this new book coming out. There's a lot of things that I did all by myself without my publisher even knowing, that had an impact on the sales of the book and being a bestseller and a #1 new release. There's a lot of stuff that I did and took upon myself to see the success of the book. And then I emailed the publisher and said, by the way, I have set this, and this in motion. I have done this. And so I'm real big about communication. And but the biggest thing that I have noticed, because all those C's in leadership of character and capacity and chemistry and competence and all that capacity, the thing that sticks out to me is chemistry. If they have a bad attitude and their face shows it, that they're upset to be there, they don't like having to explain something, they don't like being held accountable. If they have a bad attitude, that I just can't work with. If you have a great attitude and you're not as gifted or not as trained, I can work with you and we can get you to have a great role on the team, starting with the attitude. So and that's something that was learned in a leadership book many years ago, and Zig Ziglar has talked a lot about it. Just the attitude check, having a great attitude, coming to work, happy to be there every day. We live in an economy and in a world where we should all be thankful if we have a job, and we should all be thankful for the opportunity to work. And I was brought up with a strong work ethic. I started working at a grocery store when I was 14, and I've worked ever since. My kids have all worked jobs. They have a great work ethic. And so the best that we can do as parents is to instill in our kids a good work ethic. I remember when I was a teenager and I needed money for something like a youth trip coming up or a prom, my mom would say, well, there's weeds in the yard, you could go weed the yard. But it was never a gift of, here's some money, go take it and have a good time. It was always, well, you can do this chore, or you could weed this, or you can move this. It was always a way to teach me work ethic. and I was working at a grocery store from 14 on. And so I had a paycheck from there. But learning the value of putting in a good day's work and not mailing it in.
It's so good. It's so good. You hit on so many good things there. We like to say with Speak with People, when we speak with people, we're choosing healthy communication. And when we speak at people, we're choosing unhealthy communication. And so we have a list of kind of 13 toxic habits, and you just nailed, a couple of those. And sometimes people aren't even realizing they're doing them. And so, as you talked about, being clear with people, I mean, that is being kind. Like those unbelievable open conversations to say, hey, this is just, something that you do, and we just need to address it. And I think that speaks into this bigger issue. You talk about it in chapter 7, but we've really got to unlock empathy if we're going to communicate with kindness, if we're going to experience kindness. Talk to us a minute about empathy. Like, how do we dive in, understand people better? What are some of those qualities that, empathetic qualities to be able to connect better?
A couple things that I have done that I can speak to and I write about in the book, but pray about it. Ask God to help you be a more empathetic person. Start your day with meditation and with prayer, asking, how can I show empathy today? How can I show my spouse empathy? How can I show my kids empathy? How can I show my team empathy? A lot about what I do and I talk about in the book comes from meditation and journaling my feelings and getting clear thought, and meditating and just kind of grounding myself where I don't get too big of an ego. I don't get out ahead of myself. I actually have this book in front of me right here that I picked up at a airport, Ego is the Enemy. And it jumped out at me, and I thought, well, we can all work on that, because, the more successful you get, the more likely it is the ego can creep down. And so keeping that in check. And then studying people, I mentioned Mr. Rogers. I have studied Mr. Rogers. I've read about Mr. Rogers. I have watched his movie, his documentary. I've watched old shows that were over my head and lost on me as a kid. But the message that he was sending to people was very strategic, very thoughtful. And he practiced empathy on his show. And then there are documentaries that you can watch to see and to find remarkable people. If you go to Amazon Prime Video and just search the documentary section and read, I love to read stories about people that have lived remarkable lives. People that showed and loved and cared. In my book, there's at least a couple times where I quote Mother Teresa and the model that she had. And I quote her in the generosity chapter when she was known for being very poor, but she was generous with her time. And she had time for people. She listened to people. She mourned with people. She hurt with people. And so she was very empathetic. She did not have a lot of financial money to give because she was never wealthy, but I included her in the generosity chapter. And so find people that you can look up to that are ahead of you or that model empathy well, and then ask God to help you get there.
Wow. Boy, that's so good. That is absolutely so good. When we speak about kindness in our organization, what are some things that leaders can do? I mean, even from the bottom to the top, to the top to the bottom, to make sure that we're helping, spread that kindness and that it's permeating throughout the organization.
I think when you read this book, you'll get some good ideas. There's 2 chapters that relate to business leaders and team leaders. One's on composure, how you compose yourself and how you're self-aware and stay in control of your emotions and how you react to situations. Another chapter is on wisdom, how we live, how we walk, how we work as it relates to wisdom. The Bible says to ask for wisdom and God will give it generously. And so every day I'll ask for wisdom. And so having composure with how we deal with people, having wisdom in how we lead in situations. And then the thing that's the secret ingredient, we talk about the secret power of kindness. The secret ingredient for it all, with the question you just asked, is for leaders, is consistency. And that's why I said, take it a day at a time. If day after day after day after day builds up a life of empathy, a life of composure, a life of wisdom, a life of kindness, if we are consistent day after day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, that builds up to a legacy where people look back and as you mentioned, at a memorial service when a lot of people don't want to talk, when people say, when I think back on Jason, he was always blank. What are you consistently known for? Greg was always blank. And so that, there's not going to be a lot of wording they can put on a tombstone. So it would be words that were shared at a memorial service or in a eulogy or something like that. Or just when people remember you and tell stories and your kids say, dad was always blank. And so it starts one day at a time, one foot in front of another. In the book, I talk about going the extra mile, which was a thing that they were taught in the culture and the DNA and the code at the Ritz-Carlton. And I talk about how the Ritz-Carlton modeled going the extra mile. Then Chick-fil-A liked that, saw it, stole it, and started using it in their organization. And when you read the Chick-fil-A training manual, they talk about going the extra mile, which, as you know, is a biblical concept, something that Jesus taught. And so both to the most successful hotel chain that's won the most prestigious awards, Ritz-Carlton, and the most successful restaurant and fast food restaurant that always comes in number one in America is Chick-fil-A. And they are both patterned after and modeled after a biblical example of going the extra mile for somebody else. So if it works for Ritz-Carlton and it works for Chick-fil-A, it can't hurt to try it in your own organization, going the extra mile, showing empathy and serving others.
I love that. I love that. So last question as we kind of finish up, what can a leader expect, the benefits or, the things that they'll see in their life if they're doing this consistently, living out the secret power of kindness?
I think a couple things come to mind as what a leader could respect. One is a good name and reputation, which comes with respect, where people respect you because you are a man or a woman of your word. And two, in business, it's repeat customers. When I talk about hospitality, there's a chapter in the book where I talk about hospitality. When I consult in customer service, when I consult with organizations on creating a kind culture as opposed to a toxic one, when we talk about creating kind cultures in business, the best thing that we can get is repeat customers. And we live in a day and age, and I just said this recently on another interview where restaurants, businesses, different places in our communities live and die by reviews. People get on Google reviews, they get on Facebook reviews, they get on Yelp, and they either rip you apart or sing your praises. But businesses live or die by reviews. And when we lead with kindness, we're going to have more positive reviews than negative reviews. And that turns into repeat business, which is what we all need. We don't, just like churches don't want to have somebody visit once and never come again. They want them to return and experience guest retention and have first-time guests turn into second-time guests and third-time guests, and then eventually get plugged into the church. In the same way, businesses, it does them no good if somebody eats at their restaurant once and never comes again. Whereas my favorite restaurant, they see me multiple times a week. They know I'm going to keep coming back because they take such good care of me and they have such amazing service. So when you lead with kindness and have excellent customer service, you'll have repeat customers or repeat business.
I love that. I love that. Oh my goodness. Greg, I took a page and a half of notes. This was so rich. I know this is going to bless our listeners. Before I let you go, just a couple really quick rapid fire questions they can kind of keep to get to know you. We talked about a couple TV shows. Do you have an all-time favorite TV show?
Yeah, but I kind of cheated on this answer because I wanted to list my top three, but my all-time favorite, because I watch it every night, is Seinfeld. I still watch Seinfeld from the 90s every night. But as far as more recent, modern, creative shows, my top three to watch and to binge watch were Lost, 24 with Jack Bauer, and Prison Break. Those are some of my top shows of all time.
Oh, all three of them so good. You're around a lot of speakers. I mean, your conference has lots of speakers. Who are some of your favorites?
Yeah, some have spoken at my conference, some have not, but speakers that I love to go hear, either at my conference or at a conference they're speaking at, would be John Maxwell, because he's like a father figure and a pastoral figure, just so down to earth. Andy Stanley, because he's a world-class communicator and so practical, just a brilliant teacher. I have listened to Beth Moore my whole adult life and love her teaching. Somebody who I follow a lot and love any chance I get the opportunity to hear him speak at a conference is Seth Godin, because he's so creative, so brilliant. And then one of my favorite speakers to ever speak at our First Impressions conference, world-class leader as well, is Craig Rochelle.
Oof. Absolutely. Absolutely. I love that. And we'll put a link to each of those in the show notes, because you need to definitely check those out. Well, Greg, thank you so much for your time. Before I let you go, tell us where we can find you online. What's the best place to get more information about you?
Yeah, well, the book you mentioned that you just read is The Secret Power of Kindness, and you pretty much just go to the book title, secretpowerkindness.com. And so if you go to secretpowerkindness.com, that'll wind up there. If you go to my name, gregatkinson.com, there's links to the book and to my work, my consulting and coaching. I'm at Greg Atkinson on Twitter, at Greg Atkinson on Instagram, and very searchable and easy to find on Facebook as well if you just search Greg Atkinson. But I'm out there. I'm on social as well. My email is greg@gregatkinson.com. So if you pretty much search my name, you'll find me.
Well, we got you. All right. Well, thank you again, Greg. Appreciate having you on the Speak with People podcast so much.
Thank you for having me.
Well, and thank you to our listeners. We're so glad that you are part of the Speak with People community. Don't forget, if you have not joined the Speak with People community group on Facebook, head over there, type in Speak with People community group on Facebook, and come in. Hundreds of leaders every single day. We're talking about how we can communicate more effectively, and we're just kind of growing together as a community. Also, don't forget that very, very soon, you can access the pathway. If you are someone who wants to invest in your public speaking, but you know that you don't do it all the time, but you know that you want to be better when you're called upon, the pathway is for you. So go to speakwithpeople.com/pathway. You can download the free ebook, and you can find out more information about how you can become a better, more effective, confident communicator. Well, thank you again for listening to the podcast. Every single time you share it or you review the podcast just means the world. Again, this podcast exists because we believe that healthy communication is oxygen for your relationships and your leadership. And we know when you choose to communicate in healthy ways, you will change your world with your words. Thanks again, and we'll see you next week.